Welcome to another episode of Kindness Magazine. I'm your host, Brenda Carey, and I'm so proud to bring you today a couple interviews that I conducted with Rod Coronado, the man, the myth, the legend. That's right. Stay tuned. It's my great privilege to introduce to you Rod Coronado. If you don't know who he is, then you probably were not an activist in the 80s or the 90s, because he was one of the original spokespeople for the Animal Liberation Front and the Earth Liberation Front in the United States. Let me go through some of the things that Rod became known for. First of all, when he was a teenager, he was working with the organization Sea Shepherd and sunk a couple whaling ships in Iceland. And so that is something that not only was an exciting thing to have happen at that time. Greenpeace had made it well known that there was a lot of illegal whaling going on. Sea Shepherd then got involved and showed that as well. And so far, all these organizations had been able to accomplish was raising media attention on these things through various stunts, like putting themselves in their little boats, small boats, in between these gigantic whales and these gigantic whaling vessels. After being out at sea with Sea Shepherd and witnessing this, Rod Coronado wasn't having any of it. So he and a friend went to the docks where the whaling ships were, loosened some screws, and sunk a couple ships. They did not get prosecuted for this because Paul Watson, being the brilliant man that he is, offered to turn himself in for the crime and to be on trial in Iceland, which would have been a very public international trial, and a lot of things would have come out about the illegal whaling that was going on. So Iceland decided to not prosecute. So this is Rod Coronado as a teenager. Then in his 20s, he started a campaign that he called Operation Bite Back. This book was then written about it, where he basically took on the fur industry and went after the places where the animals were bred, went undercover, got some excruciating footage of what goes on there, and also went after the laboratories at the universities where the animals were also bred, and research was done to try to bolster the fur industry. Also during that time period, one of the coolest things I think Rod did was he released a couple hundred wild horses that had been rounded up. So there was quite a few actions that he did that got a lot of media attention. At first as a spokesperson for the Animal Liberation Front, and then later on as the FBI pursued him, it came out that he was the perpetrator of these acts. And eventually he did end up going to prison for 4 years for arson at a university laboratory. And then when he was released from prison, one of the agreements that he signed in his plea deal was that he would be able to speak about things that had happened. And so he became quite a well-known public speaker. This was not making the FBI too happy with the deal that they had struck, because he was inspiring a lot of people to continue to conduct similar actions.
When I was a young man, I was full of piss and vinegar. And I was a committed animal rights activist and a radical environmentalist, as radical as they got.
They continued to surveil him for about a decade. And then in the early 2000s, if you were around at that time, you'll remember it was quite an interesting time where the Patriot Act, I should say, and many other anti-terrorism laws were directed at a lot of animal rights activists and environmental activists. And Rod was giving a speech, and someone asked him about an incendiary device that was used at a prior action that Rod was never connected with, and he simply described it. And this is a description that could easily be found on the internet or in books that are sold on Amazon. But the FBI took what he said there And after 2 years of building a case, we're able to bring him before a grand jury and put him in prison for a couple more years for describing that incendiary device. And a little while later, a couple years after that, they imprisoned him again for about 6 months. He was released early for good behavior, but he was imprisoned that time for friending someone on Facebook who was an activist, which is something that he was not supposed to do. He's not supposed to have any contact with activists, according to his release and probation deal. So anywho, that is the history of Rod Coronado, controversial as it may be. There are plenty of animal rights and environmental activists that will say they don't agree with his tactics, they don't agree with breaking the law. And then again, there are equally as many people, if not more, who think of him as a hero. There's a collection of his writings from prison, as well as that were published in the Earth First journals. Really beautiful philosophy, really beautiful imagery, almost poetic, speaking about the animals and the earth. He refers to the animals as Native American animals. And I should let you know that Rod Coronado is a Native American also. And so we speak in these interviews about his philosophy that led him to the actions that he took. And we speak about larger issues and about his tactics nowadays and what is actually effective. And that's one thing that he's definitely well known for, is strategy. So I hope that you will listen to these interviews. There's 2 interviews. One that was conducted in 2004, and that was when I was making a documentary that I never quite finished. So got the chance to finally use that footage here. And the second portion is an interview that I just recently conducted. Rod is now in his 50s, and he's working with an organization that he founded called Wolf Patrol. And they are basically an education and outreach group that seeks to educate the public about the type of hunting techniques that are used that are especially cruel, such as poisoning of wolves, bear baiting, hounds being used in the hunting of bears, which is cruel to both the hounds and the bears. So he works to film such things and bring that to the public. He engages with the hunters and seeks to start a dialogue and try to change hearts and minds. So that's where we come in as Kindness Magazine. Is first of all, of his philosophy of kindness that you'll see has been a direct thread through everything that he has done. And you will also see that, especially now, he's a father, and he has spent the last 20 years or so very much dedicated to that, and is more about creating positive dialogue, about creating greater understandings, about bridging the gaps and connecting with others using kindness. So I hope that you'll enjoy these interviews as much as I did. And without further ado, here you go. The man, the myth, the legend, Rod Coronado. Starting with our first interview in 2004.
Animal liberation to me is all-encompassing liberation. It's not seeing just the situation of animals, but recognizing that the world looks at all of natural creation, the same way, and that animals are inseparable from that, and our liberation is intrinsically connected to theirs as it is to every other living thing. So it's interesting, so it's interesting to see all these great people that were like all pro-shack, pro-ALF as little as a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and now they're not as eager as they were to invite me to their town, host a benefit or something, and I know it has a lot to do with people in those organizations that they employ saying that they do not want them to have anything to do with people like me. And the horrible irony of that is the historic parallel with the anti-slavery movement and the abolition societies that did not want to have anything to do with the Underground Railroad or rescuing slaves illegally, going so far as to support, the Fugitive Slave Act. It's exactly what people like Wayne Pacelle are doing, and others in the movement by signing off on the blacklisting of animal rights activists as terrorists.
But you maintain the high ground.
So we do maintain a moral high ground that separates us inarguably from the people that we oppose. They're the ones with blood on their hands, and whatever argument they use to justify that, we can rest assured, that the evidence remains. They're doing killing, and however they argue it, it's still death and destruction. Whereas the most extreme actions that we engage in, property destruction, be it through explosives or fire, we're still talking about inanimate objects whose sole purpose was the destruction of life. And so, as a nonviolent activist and believer, I think that it's my obligation to adhere to my nonviolence by taking those actions that target only property and inanimate objects. And I think that's the greatest violent action anyone can do, whether it's disabling a nuclear warhead or missile silo or a computer that launches missiles or a slaughterhouse or animal research laboratory. All of those actions that prevent greater suffering is the ultimate ahimsa, in my opinion. And I think that Gandhi himself recognized that, as do most adherers to nonviolence, and that is that nonviolence is strength, is in your opponent's ability to recognize its value, that you are willing to give your life for what you believe in, and in recognizing that, them being intimidated. That's based on your opponent having a basis of respect for life. The way that our corporations and our governments in this country, let alone elsewhere in the world, have demonstrated is that they have no respect for life. What we saw in Tiananmen Square with the pro-democracy movement's use of nonviolence there. We saw it with a nonviolent movement in Northern Ireland that gave birth instead to the IRA as it was quashed. You see it in every struggle where legitimate means, in South Africa, legitimate means are squashed and people are oppressed and they're forced to it. Nobody wakes up and chooses to use armed struggle or violence. It's solely to defend themselves. So I think that what we're doing here is that we're practicing a level of nonviolence in as much of a manageable way as we can, despite the knowledge that the destruction that's going on to the natural world and the animal world is threatening our very existence. Not just the lives of individual animals, but it's literally threatening the health of our planet, creating problems that we don't have solutions for. And when you look at that evidence that's before you of what we've done in the last century alone, through the creation of nuclear and radioactive waste, pollution, heavy metals contaminations, introductions of exotic species, urban sprawl, overhunting, poisoning, trapping, you name it, animal agriculture, all of those things have give us great reason to use whatever tactics are necessary to prevent the continued destruction of the world as we know it. In light of all that, I think we should be getting a medal for not using violence, because we are the only ones in this equation that are demonstrating a belief in compassion for life. And that's the reason why, no matter how much mudslinging is done in the struggle and how many times we're called terrorist or extremist, that I just sleep well at night knowing that none of our actions have resulted in even a minuscule amount of the violence that they commit every day. So that's my long answer to the non-violence question.
We talked about before about talking about your heritage and its connection to what you do and how you feel that's related.
My family came from northern Mexico in the late 1800s and early 1900s, where they lived for thousands of years as members of the Ome tribe, known today as Pasquayaki. And both my great-grandmothers fled persecution and war in Mexico against us as indigenous people because of the beliefs that we held and because of our refusal to be assimilated into dominant culture. So it's very much my existence as I understand it is a product of resistance. My family, my people would not be alive today if we did not take up arms and fight and kill and destroy our enemies. And it's only because we had a willingness to do that that we're alive today. And that's not a philosophical choice. That was a practical choice, a practical decision, not even a choice. And it was simply what we had to do to survive. And as a result of that, my family has always remembered its roots, and I was always raised to remember the sacrifices of my ancestors, and told to respect animals and natural creation. My family's regular pastime, as far back as I can remember, was camping, being outdoors, and it was there where I first found my strongest spiritual connection, and that was with the natural world. And my family allowed that to foster and grow into respect for animals that clashed horribly with the real world eventually. But nonetheless, those principles that my ancestors lived by, I consider my obligation to live by those today. And it was always the duty of our people and our warrior societies to protect the land, people, and culture. And their sacrifices were so we could continue to protect the world for our future generations. And that translates for me into protecting the land, people, and culture. And the land as I know it is this planet, and the people as I know it aren't just the two-leggeds, but the four-leggeds and the winged ones. And the culture, as I see it, is any culture that lives in harmony with the natural world and lives with respect towards other beings and other people, with the best interest of all. And that's my duty, and that's something that I might not have been able to articulate as a child, but looking back now, I know that that's where my life has always been going towards. And now that I'm more in touch with the Yaqui community by living here in Tucson, Arizona, I can see and I can feel directly that that is my duty and what I am supposed to be doing. It is what I believe Creator's intent has been for me. When I'm in my community and people come up to me and thank me for the work I've done to interfere with a lion hunt in the area, I know that's the greatest honor I could receive as an activist, is my elders showing respect for what I believe in. Not what I believe in, what we believe in, what we all fight for. And that's what it's about. It's so much more about that, to me, than winning any legislative victory. And because it's more real. And so, I never came to the level of activism or commitment that I have today because of a philosophical progression, because of books that I read, because of any Western or European ideal. It was because I always knew that there were people that fought for the things that I believed in, people that gave their lives in horrible, horrible, tragic circumstances. And reading about those as a youth just made the struggle, whether it be for animals in laboratories and fur farms or against old growth logging in Northern California, it has always been the same struggle. It has always been the same struggle for me that those indigenous people fought for: Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, Tetaviecti, Geronimo, Victorio. All those people, what they fought for was the very same worldview that we believe in, whether we call ourselves animal rights activists or environmentalists or peace activists or social justice activists, anti-globalization activists. We all believe in the world that still exists today and that living cultures still adhere to. And that, to me, is our salvation, is a larger movement, not just animal rights or environmentalism. This is that we're not operating on some altruistic ideal or utopian vision. We're fighting for a world that existed and still does exist and is continually being destroyed as we know it. The simple belief that animals are our relations and our people is a worldview that is mentally driven out of us as from children. That's a level of genocide and war, in my opinion. And so, that's all part of an ancient struggle that goes back hundreds, thousands of years. And And I think that a lot of people, whether they be in Native American or whatever, everybody's indigenous to somewhere, and in everybody's ancestry is a story of resistance, very similar to the principles that we're fighting for today. And I think that's no coincidence. That's the continuation of this spirit of resistance that beats in our hearts, that we have no control over. That it affects us because we are open to it, because we're compassionate beings, and we have not allowed ourselves to be lulled into sleep. And so we feel, we have incredible empathy for what's going on in the world, and we're willing to do something about it. And it's ridiculous not to recognize our connection to the generations of people that gave their lives fighting for the same things. That's where I get so much of my inspiration from whenever I feel defeated. So it's something that I hope a lot of people learn, especially young people. This is that, the warriors of our culture, indigenous earthen culture people, whether they be in Britannia or here or South America or elsewhere, all of them relied on the young people to defend them, to protect them from harm. And that's the most important duty, regardless of what your skin color is, regardless of what your ethnicity is. This is that we no longer live in a small tribal community. We live in a global community, and our actions affect people far, far away. And just as much, the people causing those actions, who live in our own backyards, it's our obligation to prevent them from carrying on. So that's that.
That was beautiful. So let's talk about what is a typical day in the life of Rod Coronado.
When I'm not fighting, when I'm not involved in a campaign, I love nothing more right now in my life than to spend time with my son. That's my strength right now, and it's going to be for a long time, because only in parenthood and fatherhood do I really think that we realize how precious life is and how beautiful it is when it comes into this world.
How old is he?
He's going to be 3 in October.
Let's talk about some of the things that you're famous for.
I don't know. I think probably the first campaign I worked on that resulted in an amount of publicity that resulted in me individually, being recognized, was when I was working with Sea Shepherd, which was the first form of direct action that I began as a teenager when I was 19. I got out of high school. And the following year, in 1986, was the first year that the moratorium on commercial whaling went into effect that had been imposed by the International Whaling Commission. And Iceland, being the nation that violated it, was the target nation for a Sea Shepherd direct action campaign that I proposed to Paul Watson, the captain of Sea Shepherd, and with the help of another individual, David Howitt, we did carry out an attack on the whaling industry that resulted in 2 ships being sunk and the whaling station being destroyed, and acceptance of responsibility for those actions. And I think that really set stage for following actions I was going to take, because it showed me how much individuals can do to affect an individual animal abuse or environmental destruction enterprise. And from there, it was just a question of applying the equation of direct action to different issues, and from starting with marine mammals, to moving towards fur animals primarily in the late 80s, be it smashing up fur store windows, gluing their locks, spray painting slogans on their front, or to the eventual infiltration of the fur farm industry. All of those things were done with the same principle of direct action, which is to cause economic damage and impact the profit margins of enterprise so much that it no longer becomes profitable to continue. And so from Iceland to Canada, where I was arrested for ALF actions in 1987, to 1990, when I infiltrated the fur farm industry and spent a year undercover, and then rehabilitating animals from a fur farm, and upon completion of that project, launching a campaign against the industry that I had infiltrated with the understanding and knowledge that I had gained in that year. I think that led to not so much reputation as much as an example of how we as activists and as individuals and as small groups of people with limited resources and skills can be incredibly effective. And by targeting the fur farm industry as we did in 1990 and 91, by first targeting the experimental base for the industry, which was funded by the industry itself, but yet taking place on university research laboratories, and targeting Oregon State University's experimental fur farm laboratory and the resulting raid, resulting in it to be shut down. Washington State University's experimental fur farm laboratory that same summer, Michigan State University's experimental fur farm laboratory that the following winter, Utah State University's predator research program that following fall. All of these actions comprise part of Operation Bite Back, and the intent was to demonstrate a strategic effectiveness with direct action, with the hopes that other people would follow suit against the same industry. And it's exactly what happened. From 1992, when our action stopped, things were quiet for a short period of time, but I think beginning in 1995, when I began my prison sentence, there was a lot more attacks on the fur farm industry, over 70 raids on fur farms, and the resulting impact being, of course, many of those farms being shut down. And I think that is that's the reputation, that's the record that I like to stand by, is that a demonstration that we can empower ourselves to affect real change, and that we don't have to rely on any system of government, any public authority or agency to do so. It's all within the power of our own ability to believe that we can affect change. Yeah, I think I don't know. I don't think of a campaign or choose the issues I work on based on whether I think I can get a lot of attention towards them. I attack issues that I believe I can be effective against, and if anything, maybe through the demonstration of a pre-thought strategic analysis of what we're going to do and following through with that, that is what results in such a end result that it is noticeable, that it does appear to be a victory. A hunt is shut down, hunters pack up their stuff and go home, a whaling ship is sunk, a fur farm is shut down. That's very tangible. Nobody can argue that wasn't effective. And whether you're outraged that this establishment was shut down or supportive of it, people find out about it, they hear about that. And I think that is the reputation that I have maybe developed, and it's one I'm very proud of. I mean, it's something, when I see websites where people are dedicating, national airtime and paying for commercials to be aired nationally on networks, and paying public relation firms to design full-page newspaper ads targeting specifically the things that I have done, paid for by my enemies, I know that I'm being effective, and I know that I don't need any organization to do that. And that's probably the biggest reason why they so fear people such as the ALF and the ELF and others that engage in direct action, is because we're invisible to them. They don't know where we are. They don't know where to serve a search warrant or put a wiretap, or who to arrest, or who to intimidate. So it's the power of the guerrilla warrior that's always existed, and I think that, coupled with the fact that what we fight for, what I've always fought for, it has been the preservation of life and not the destruction of life, and never, has it been in my record to engage in physical violence. So, those are all things that I'd like to think have set an example for other people.
How do you come up with these strategies? Did you learn strategy somewhere?
Yes, yes. Strategy is something you learn by studying other people's strategy. And when I realized that we had no power militarily or with people against some of the most powerful industries and countries in the world, it doesn't take long for you to realize that it's time to start learning the lessons of other people who have fought those same powers. And so I love reading books about the Apache resistance. I love reading books about Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and their transition from warfare as a matter of gentlemanly honor, where killing was not the objective, but maybe it's touching your enemy. And so learning that a small group of people can affect great change was something that I learned by studying indigenous resistance, the struggles of William Wallace, other people, Boudica, the Celtic prince of Britannia, Tupac Amaru in Peru in the 1500s. All of these struggles have provided important lessons that can be applied in our campaigns. And also I had the extreme good fortune of spending, the first 5 years of my activism with Paul Watson, who was, and I believe today to be one of the greatest eco-warriors ever. And I think he saved me a lot of time by showing me just how little hope there was for change within the system, by no better way than by seeing it from my own eyes, whether it be with a violation of the IWC's moratorium or drift net fishing in the North Pacific. And most of all, I think what Paul was an important mentor in with me as far as knowing strategy and campaigns is knowing how to deal with the media. Paul was somebody who showed me that it's us who need to be exploiting the media, not vice versa, and it's us who allow ourselves to be exploited. And when you choose the battlefield instead and set the stage by knowing the players and the factors in an issue and how to create the story yourself, that's how you can win in the media. And so all of those things combined gave me the perspective I know now. And also just with a healthy dose of pragmatic realization of how prone to violence our opponents are. So much that I no longer at all believe in blocking roads and sitting down with our bodies and putting ourselves at the mercy of people that we know will commit violence against us. I think that that's irresponsible and violent. And in the absence of wanting to do that, there has to be something more effective in its place, and that is what I try to suggest and set an example with the campaigns I work on. And the way I see it, we're all bioregional, groups of people working towards the same goals, but yet very independently, and we have to learn from each other. I'm a convicted felon, known eco-terrorist in the government's eyes, and anytime I go before a federal judge for sentencing, I will be seen as a career criminal if it's for anything having to relate to defending the earth or animals again. So it's a very strategic decision for me to remain in the struggle by only engaging in levels of direct action that I feel the consequences are acceptable. I don't want me or my friends or anyone in this struggle to get 22 years in prison. To this day, people still walk up to me, strangers, thanking me for the work that we've done out there. And it's all because we represented ourselves as representatives of the community. And so that's very much what I'm about now, is that I'm about fighting for the same things that I've always fought for, and I always will fight for, but with community support. Whether that community is one of your own community or one in the community that is most affected by the issue, no struggle can be effective without community support. And I just think that we're being corralled into a pen labeled terrorist, and unless we do something to stop that now by amassing more popular support, we are going to be ending up in prison with 22-year sentences. And it's only when regular people, mainstream people, recognize that the things we fight for are just, and that they're willing to support it themselves, that governments are going to know that they can't get away with such outrageous things.
Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of our feature on Rod Coronado. Make sure you don't miss part 2. There's lots of really great stuff to come that you definitely don't want to miss.
Please subscribe and ring the bell to stay up to date on our videos. If you are not already subscribed to our magazine, you'll find the link to do so in this video's description.